Hi, Tony DeWitt here, Missouri appellate attorney and a guy who likes to make the law make sense on YouTube. Today we're going to talk about the conviction of Charlie Adelson and some of the things that I might very well do if I was in his shoes and I had an opportunity to appeal this case. Um, First of all, let me get right to the heart of one of the big things that I felt was terribly unfair here, and that is the use of essentially criminal threats against the other members of the Adelson family by supposedly undercover detectives.
On May 6th, does Donna Adelson call the undercover?
Yes.
How many times does she call the undercover?
I believe maybe 3 times.
Okay. Does she leave a voicemail one time?
I believe so.
How many times does she actually have a conversation with the undercover?
Just once.
All right. And Judge, that call is on State's Exhibit 107. Move to publish that call at this time.
You may.
Hello?
This is Mrs. Adelson. Is this
Hello?
Sammy? Sammy. Okay. My grandchildren had my phone before, so
Senora Adelson?
I'm Mrs. Adelson.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. My grandchildren
Yes.
had my phone before, so and I just saw that you called.
Oh, okay.
I was
You left a message on my voicemail.
right. I did.
Yes.
This is my problem. You approached me on Alton Road. You handed me an article from the newspaper about my ex-son-in-law. You told me I need to call you and help your friend who was in prison. Now, at the time you did that, I didn't understand what you were talking about. I didn't call you back. Then you mail me a threatening letter. Then you send me a text message to my phone that says I'm not taking you seriously. So I am taking you seriously. And I really want you to listen to me.
I'm listening.
I have to tell you, I mean, this is important. I have been so stressed out. I have spoken to 10 or 12 people who are close friends of mine, telling them about this and basically picking their brains and asking them what I should do, because I don't know your friend who is in jail. You mentioned a name. I don't even know his name.
You know, I can understand giving somebody the opportunity to incriminate themselves, but what I can't wrap my head around is using threats to get them to effectively incriminate themselves. Now, this is a good example of why it is absolutely necessary to, at every time you have any interaction and anybody even whispers the idea that you might be guilty of some crime, you immediately retain counsel. Generally speaking, after someone has requested counsel, whether that be private counsel or whether it be appointed counsel, once they have invoked their right to counsel, a person cannot be questioned by the police without the police first getting a waiver from the suspect to allow them to question them. So the reason that's important is if you can't question a witness, you can't use an undercover detective to approach the witness and do effectively what they did in this case, which is essentially first of all, hand a note to a woman on the street, and then basically send them a threatening letter telling them that they need to, take these threats seriously. And in case you're wondering what I'm talking about here, they approached Adelson's mom and said, one of our friends is in jail, or one of our family members is in jail because he helped out your family, and so we want to make sure that you take care of his family. Essentially, it looked like an extortion attempt, which is completely unlawful. Two things that the Adelsons could have done at that point. One was to immediately go to the police and say, hey, I'm being extorted. And I think one of the reasons that Adelson got convicted, other than the fact that there was just a lot of evidence that sort of hung him out to dry here, one of the reasons that he got convicted is because they threw up so much bad stuff about his sister and his mother, and about how his mother wanted these children back under her control. If not her control, at least where she could get to them much more easily than they were in Tallahassee. And so, in that regard, what you have here is you have the police threatening an illegal act in order to extort essentially a confession or get some other kind of concession from these folks. And they played all of these things in court, which if Mrs. Adelson, Donna Adelson, the mother, or Wendy Adelson, the wife, had at any time invoked their right to counsel. In other words, they'd said, look, I have a lawyer. If you want to talk to me, you got to talk to my lawyer. If they had invoked that, they could not have used that because it would have been a violation of the Fifth Amendment right to counsel and the Sixth Amendment right to counsel. Now, that's not always the case. If somebody gets counsel appointed for them, but never actually affirmatively invokes the right to counsel. For example, in Louisiana, if you are arrested and you're indigent, they automatically appoint counsel for you, whether you request it or not. And if you don't request it and you don't invoke that right to counsel, then immediately what happens is they're going to question you. And that's what happened in the Monteo case, and the Supreme Court had no problem with that because you have to invoke the right. In other words, if you don't invoke the right to counsel, you waive the right to counsel, and that's a bad thing. You may be wondering how any of this information, particularly conversations between an undercover cop and Donna Adelson, Charlie's mom, could be used against Charlie in his trial. It's because Donna Adelson is listed as an unindicted co-conspirator. And in a conspiracy, if you have three people in a conspiracy and only one of them pulled the trigger, well, anything said by the other two that don't happen to be indicted can still be used against the conspirator that's on trial. And so it's very useful for the police to be able to list them as unindicted co-conspirators because it allows them to get in all of these phone calls with all of these additional people. Now, as to whether or not it's truly relevant, it's only relevant if they can establish that there was, in fact, a conspiracy between the Adelson family and Charlie to have this done. Apparently, the judge felt like they could make that showing and allowed the information in. If I was attacking this on appeal, I would pound the relevance issue to death. You know, saying just because you say they're an unindicted co-conspirator doesn't mean that they are, in fact, a conspirator. They can simply be a member of a family. A lot of times people say things in families that are jokes or that are not serious or that are aspirational, you know, like, boy, I wish that Markel character would leave forever. Things like that get said, and they are not intended to be acted upon. So there's a lot of room here to spin up a very good appeal for Charlie. Obviously, Charlie has the means and ability to pay for a good appeal in this case. He had excellent legal help during the trial, and there's a good chance he could get this conviction overturned. So we'll have to see what happens in that regard. One of the things that really stands out here is that Wendy Adelson is an attorney. One of the things you absolutely have to do in order to get out of law school is take a course on criminal procedure. You have to know the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th Amendments and the 8th Amendment backwards and forwards so that you understand, even if you're not going to be a criminal lawyer, what to tell people if you are essentially contacted by someone who might be a friend or a relative and they don't know any other lawyer to call and they call you. You tell them, keep your mouth shut. We'll get you a lawyer. Don't say anything to anybody until, we get you a lawyer there. And that is the way that you go about protecting somebody's rights. So Wendy Adelson would have known that the smartest thing for all of the Adelsons to do is immediately invoke counsel and talk to no one, so that when somebody walked up and handed them a note, they would have been perfectly protected, and that note would not even have come into the playbook, I don't think, if they had all invoked their right to counsel. And if they had contacted someone like me who understands how the appellate system works, the moment that they came in and said, yeah, we're being suspected of murder, I would have immediately written a letter to the prosecuting attorney and to every police agency that might be involved saying, these are my clients. You may not question them. You may not contact them unless I am physically present. And the reason physically present is necessary is because it makes it more difficult to schedule that interview, and anything that makes it more difficult for the police will eventually assist the suspect in an interrogation. So one of the reasons that these folks got convicted is because they did not hire counsel early enough, and they did not invoke a right to counsel early enough. And of course, I think probably the main reason that Charlie Adelson got convicted is because he testified. Almost every person who testifies, when they testify, they slip up. They don't know what's coming. Now, the prosecutor has to turn over all the exculpatory evidence, but they don't have to highlight what they're going to hit you over the head with. And in Adelson's case, that's exactly what happened here. He went into his cross-examination after testifying that he was pure as the driven snow. He went into his cross-examination and he started getting questions he wasn't prepared for. And so what he did was he argued with the prosecutor. Now, I have to give the prosecutor some credit in that she did not lose her temper. She did not try to get the judge to help her make him answer questions. She did much the same thing that Creighton Waters did in the Murdaugh case, is she let the fish run on the line. And when it came necessary, she jerked him back. But essentially, at the end of the day, the way you create the impression of someone being a liar is you let them continue to tell the lies, because eventually they're going to say something that trips them up. And eventually, Charlie just, again, I think partially because he looked very guilty every time somebody was testifying contrary to what he thought they ought to say, I think it made it much easier for the jury to go back and in 3 hours say, we sat through the whole case. We don't have any questions. Who here thinks this guy is not guilty? And if anybody raised their hand, then probably the other 10 or 11 people were able to quickly bring them up to speed and say, yeah, Charlie is guilty, and here's the things that he said during his direct and cross-examination that sort of reveal that. So I really wish I had had an opportunity to break down the entire case, but since it's sort of old news now, I did want to get this out there. I think Charlie Adelson convicted himself. I thought his lawyer did a very good job, but the fact is, again, these folks just can't help but testify, and they think they can beat the prosecution. And although Flip Wilson did say that a lie is as good as the truth if you can get somebody to believe it, what he failed to mention was that most of the time people do not believe it. And that's essentially what happened to Charlie. Now, if I was going to appeal, I would point out that the state admitted to effectively and presented evidence in court that they threatened these people. They threatened the Adelson family. And the Adelson family didn't have any knowledge, assuming that they didn't have any knowledge, that Charlie was involved in this. They might not have responded in a way that that was appropriate. And if they'd known, they probably would have said, boy, this is the cops. But I think both Wendy Adelson and Donna Adelson made some pretty significant mistakes. Will they be charged? I don't think so. I think they've hung their hat on Charlie, and as long as they can continue and hold the line and make sure that his conviction is affirmed, he will probably be enough for the prosecution in this case. Now, that may not be enough for Dan Markle's parents. I'm sure they would very much like to see everybody they think might have had a hand in this go to jail for a really long time. But I don't see that happening. I do think the state will eventually let this rest with Adelson's sentence. And again, because this is a conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, he can certainly wind up with a life prison term with no parole. We'll have to see what the court does on that. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments down below. Like, share, subscribe, all the stuff we ask you to do. Thank you so much for watching, and if you have the opportunity today, go out of your way, do something kind for someone, and catch me down here at the beach next time. If you like this video, here are a few others you might try, and don't forget to subscribe. Have a terrific day, guys.